Okay, it is about 7:04 p.m. and today is Tuesday, May the 24th, 2022, and welcome to week number three. Three. This would be the halfway point in weeks for class. See how fast this moves. And so I encourage you to get those assignments in, get them in on time. I encourage you to um, pay close attention to what is said in the module, what is said in the rubric, and what is said in the lecture. It is very important to follow those three things to maximize your grades. In order to make sure that you maximize your grade, I usually in the lecture will cover an explanation of how you can end up with not having enough information in your paper that is satisfying the page requirements for the written assignment, or letting you know that by not providing APA required citations, which by the way, the rule is APA citations in the body and a reference page and a cover page. Romans 12, double space is required in all written assignments. Every week. That's a given already. And don't try to read the rubric without reading the module and listening to what's said, because you will find that don't try to be technical with a lawyer. That's what I am. I'm retired, but once a lawyer, always a lawyer. So I'm encouraging you to maximize your grades, follow what I just said, and then finally get your assignments completed on time by the due date. All right. If you do have some problems, let me know immediately by text or phone regarding your delay. And if there's extenuating circumstances, I will um, generally grant them. There are times when I won't grant them, but most of the time I'm pretty liberal in terms of doing that. Remember, my goal is student success, and it transfers over into professional career success. And my goal is to provide educated, ethical, and professional criminal justice individuals. And that's the way I teach. That's the way I'll continue to teach. I think that's why they pay me here. And I think that it is a disservice for me to lower that. I refuse to lower that standard, as students find out sometimes. Remember, I'm here to help you. I can be your friend, but remember, I'm not going to let you by. I'm not going to accept excuses like I didn't understand and those kinds of things. You have to learn how to do that, because you will find yourself in a professional career that would be short-lived, because you will be dismissed because you didn't understand. So you don't want to be caught in that. So let's get on board here. All right. So let me start by sharing my screen with you. Okay, and here we go. All right. So when you first open up, this is what you see. Message page. You can check your messages here. Let's take a look at the grade book, which tells us the assignments that are due. I am week 2 assignments will be graded by the end of this week. So the discussion assignment is enforcement or treatment, and your written assignment, connection between drugs, mental health, and crime. Then there's a quiz, and then your live classroom lecture. Okay, notice the due dates. Now, pay attention your discussion here, this refers to the reply post, because your initial post is due today, the 24th. You'll see that by the calendar. You'll see that by the announcement. You'll see that by me mentioning it to you in the lecture. Okay? Let's go over to the calendar. Speaking of that, let's click on the month. Here we go. Look how fast we've progressed from the 11th. Now we're at the 24th. So your initial post for this week, week 3, is due. Your live lecture is taking place right now. Your discussion post is due on Saturday. Now, make sure you have critical thinking in both of those written assignments. Your written assignment for the 29th is due. I already told you your live lecture, and then your quiz, your live lecture phrase. All right. So you can see that going into next week, we actually go into the final month already, and that the course will end on the 17th of June, not the 18th of June, not the 19th of June, but the 17th of June at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And you want to be sure that you find yourself in a situation where you've gotten your assignments in. Speaking of that, once we get to the once we get to the 30th, all week 3 assignments, of course, would be late, but by the time we get to the 5th, you cannot turn in week 1, 2, or 3 assignments. So it's very important for you to keep up to date. All right, again, I don't have a crystal ball, and I'm not going to try to figure out why you're not doing assignments. I'm just going to remind you. Okay, so here is the announcement for this week. So we're going to deal with policy and social trends, mental health, and criminal behavior. I previously sent you the PowerPoints for chapter 3 and 4 of the textbook. And then we're going to deal with the mental illness and substance disorders. And so the whole thing in a nutshell, if you can see, we're going to deal quite a bit with mental health, mental disorders. And then you're going to deal with the activities, mental health, and risk factors for substance abuse and addiction, enforcement policies, influence on social trends on drug-related policies, the knowledge check, which you'll go over yourself, but I'll introduce it to you. Again, remind you of the lecture. And then finally, you got 2 things, your discussion assignment, social policies and trends. Again, it's due tonight, the initial post, the reply post Saturday, and then your written assignments, connection between drugs, mental health, and crime, and then there's the quiz, and of course, this due this Sunday along with your key phrase or word. Notice the requirements in the classroom lessons as tab as well, and again, remind you, pay close attention to the rubrics. We're going to ask you to continue to be strong so that you can finish strong. And then my motto, adversity is a springboard to success. We all have some of that, but it's all about how you deal with it. I produced a video for you to be able to listen to yourself, share with your family and friends as well. Okay. One last time, I'll remind you, pay attention to how you can reach me. Again, my office hours You can text me, call me, or email me any hour of the day except the 25th hour of the day. Okay, and then of course my phone number here is here. Hold on. Excuse me. Ooh, apologies. Little light allergies here. And so feel free to use that number. Again, reminding you that conduct research in all your papers and don't just use the text. You'll lose points for that. And all written assignments, I said already, all in APA format. Okay, pay attention to the rubrics and so forth. All right, I just wanted to take a little detour and share that with you. Okay, let's get into the module itself. Policies and social trends, mental health, and criminal behavior. Now, I'm going to take a few minutes and go over the written assignment so you get a clear understanding. I remind you again, as I say every week, we are using that scenario that you should be familiar with from week 1 involving Dave's life circumstances. And as I warned you during week 1, we will involve ourselves related to the law, mental health, and corrections issues regarding Dave. This week, you know it's the mental health because that's the topic that we're dealing with this week. So you need to address in your written paper the connection between mental health and the self-medication phenomenon, and identify how this connects you with Dave. Summarize the risk factors due to substance abuse and mental illness. Identify Dave's risk factors, and then explain the relationship between substance abuse and criminal behavior. I've talked about that quite extensively, but I will refer to it again by simply saying that it is substance abuse that leads to criminal behavior. People commit crimes to support their drug habits, and that's pretty much explaining it. But you can elaborate on it even more. Identify the relationship in Dave's scenario. Provide at least one credible source. Now, I've said this before and I'll say it again. That's the minimum requirement. But to make your paper really good, citations in the body should support the statements in your paper. It provides the reader with the source of your statements. Very important for you to be aware of that. And should be professional language, correct spelling, grammar, and punctuation in a minimum of 2 pages. You can go beyond that. And very important that the document be submitted as a Word document, not a PDF or any other format. All right, so don't do it single space, do it double space. All right, let's satisfy APA because that's a requirement as laid out in the written assignment. Now let's incorporate that with the rubric. Notice if you don't have any citations or references, you're going to end up with 55 because I consider, this is my interpretation, I consider incomplete or incorrect description is providing details and information but no citations to support it. So it's incomplete to me because I don't know the source of that information or missing detail on how this connection impacts Dave. You got to talk about Dave. So the mental health and self-medication, the risk factors, the substance abuse and criminal behavior, then you have to provide credible sources. Now, it's not just this section. This is throughout the paper, remember. All right. And then it has to be a minimum of 2 pages. So if you did everything over here, and then you had a paper that was 1.5 pages, you're going to end up losing points in this section of the rubric. So you want to make sure that you do that. So what I rather teach is not pay attention to this, but over here, providing citations and references throughout and reference page at the end with the cover page. Again, Roman 12, double space, Word document. Um, that's the way to roll. Um, in some classes, we have PowerPoints, but I don't think we have that here in this class. But it's very important for you to satisfy the requirements of the written assignment. If you use this column as a resource, it will help you to do so. Don't work hastily. Those who don't listen to the lecture, except to get the key phrase, will probably score lower grades. There's a number of you who've gotten 100s. Why? Because you've satisfied those requirements requested in the assignment. Discussion assignment, enforcement or treatment. You'll be determining whether enforcement, war on drugs, or treatment and rehabilitation is the best approach. You already know what I think is the best one. I've talked about it, and I'll just lay it out there, rehabilitation. You don't have to agree with me, but read this article, Optimal Dynamic Allocation of Treatment and Enforcement in Illicit Drug Control. I just want to clarify, I'm pretty sure that that link is working because it was working in the last class. Let's see. And there it is. Okay, so take time to read this to help you with that. All right. And then so in your initial post, do tonight, select either enforcement or treatment, and treatment and rehabilitation goes together. If you select enforcement, explain why we need to continue the enforcement and war on drugs. If you select it, treatment, explain why we need to focus on treatment and rehabilitation. Defend your selection as the best approach for controlling crime-related, drug-related crime, and then describe the pros and cons, and then in your reply, respond to another of your classmates. Okay, several of you have already done that. I will, of course, add mine in as well. And then your quiz, which I don't click on because it will open up the quiz. You know how that works. It is timed. You have 30 minutes. It is a closed book exam. And then your live classroom recording, where you click on this and you, in the drop-down box, no, I'm sorry, this is where we will have the link replaced here for the live lecture, and then I will email it to you as well. This is where you click on and do your key phrase or word, and you get your points for that. Do that before the end of Sunday as well. So let's talk about these topics: mental health and risk factors for substance abuse, enforcement policies, the influence of social trends, and then we'll conclude with just sharing a knowledge check. There is a survey. If you can take the time to do that, it would be beneficial. All right, so now, mental health and risk factors. Now, I've already talked about the fact that there are some issues in crime that relate to people committing crimes to support their drug habits. But there is also what I call a double whammy when you have drug use and mental health combined. Um, there is a definite connection between mental health and the use of substances, addictive substances, very much so. And that if we don't treat the mental illness aspect, we have problems such as addictive drugs and so forth. In our country, it it is on the rise. Mental health patients lead uh, um, pretty much very serious offenses, but it says here that 38% of those mental health patients use alcohol, 44% use cocaine, and 40% smoke cigarettes. So you can see it's a high level and create many problems. And we've already talked about the kind of drugs. We talk about opioids. We'll get into that more in the weeks to come. Methamphetamines, we talked about that. Marijuana, which again, I repeat, I consider as a gateway drug, even if it is legalized. And so in mental illness, all kinds of psychological things happen when along with substance abuse. As I said a few minutes ago, it's a double whammy. Well, it's also called, as in our module, a double diagnosis occurring at the same time and can lead to very complicated issues. Now, let me just briefly just take a look at this. You see that comorbidity, where you have the two of these crossing, mental health and substance abuse, where it is a real serious, 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 serious problem in our country. I'm sure those of you who heard about today, the 24th, another mass shooting, this time in a grammar school. It's troubling. It hasn't come out yet, but the person who committed the offense was killed. But I can tell you this, that when you do some further investigations, you can even consider the actions that somewhere in lurking is probably going to be, well, first of all, mental disorder is probably one of the issues. But imagine if that person was on substances that were added to that could lead to actions like this. You have to ask yourself the question, what leads a person to go to a grammar school and shoot? Now I found out that 20 people have died. Originally it was 14 kids and one teacher, but more. And it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is there is a problem. We talk about gun control. Yes, that's an issue, but here's the bigger thing is the wrong people are getting their hands on the guns. And I'm not talking about the criminals that are committing violent offenses, the gangs and robbery. I'm talking about individuals with mental disorders or that are high on drugs and they're not stable and make irrational decisions, such as what happened today. All right. So one of the things that comes about with the problem is that there are people who find themselves as with mental health problems and they self-medicate. In other words, what they do is they are so messed up in their thinking that they seek to try to anesthetize or cover up in their own minds the drugs by using self-medication. And oftentimes that results in the use of cocaine, marijuana, heroin as well. But here's the point. Self-medication can be as simply as dealing with painkillers or either dealing with using alcohol and other things of that nature. And so the effects of using these drugs along with the mental health issues result in violent action. So as it says here, once an individual's judgment is impaired due to alcohol or drug abuse and mental health issues, it's increasingly difficult for that individual to evaluate risk and not be concerned about it because they just do, because they're oblivious to it. They don't have the capacity even to think about right or wrong. It's not a standard um, for the to get off on a case saying that you're not guilty by reason of insanity. No, this is because of medication and or your mental condition. And so it says not only is the person at risk for offending, but they are vulnerable to becoming victims. Once victimized by an event like assault, robbery, rape, or other personal conflicts, and a combination of substance abuse and environmental circumstances leads to more severe mental challenges and probably the use of more drugs. So it's very simple. What happens is the key thing in terms of when you are a criminal justice professional, the question is, are you coming across a person who's a criminal, or are you coming across a person who has a mental health issue and has used drugs at the same time, or just done one, mental health, or used drugs? But when you have the double, we already talked about that. It's not easy to just simply, as it says, arrest, prosecute, and incarcerate. No, we have to deal with the ability of that person's mind, the mens rea, or the criminal intent, because those drugs and the mental state can cover those things up, and the person is not thinking correctly. So let's look at some of the things that create risk factors for addiction. And generally there are three things. The biological factors. Now, I'm not a big fan of this because what it says is that a person is generally biologically born with these things in their system. Well, that happens periodically, but usually the point of matter is if you identify the problem and work on it, getting the proper treatment for that individual, you can help them. And so when it says it's biological, you have people who are depressed and bipolar or bipolar, and can result in them becoming addicted to drugs to cover that up. Then there's a psychological factor where the person is one of low self-esteem. They don't see any positive way of doing anything. You might have a person who is PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome disorders, that have been either victim of abuse or other trauma, but you find quite a few of those type of people are individuals who were in the military and exposed to wars. And it happened quite a bit in the Gulf War, the Vietnam War, Iraq and Iran and those places, but it happened in other forms where individuals find that if there's an attack, as it was in Fort Hood some years ago, my wife's cousin was down there at this time when a psychologist went off and killed people, and he was right there. He saw it. But the point of the matter is that even though he didn't get shot, he still talks about it. So there's still some elements of being exposed to that traumatic thing in life. Now, I was exposed to some traumatic stuff. I already told you, if you listen to my Adversity as a Springboard to Success story. And sometimes I get, I get down about it, thinking about it, and particularly now coming up on the 30th of May, which is next Monday. That's the exact date that both my parents were murdered. And so seeing it, what happened with my dad, as you listen to my story, as a 7-year-old, and with I have me having um, a photographic memory, uh, that's a traumatic issue. But fortunately for me, I was able to take that and turn it around. And that's why my part of my motto, that's why my motto, adversity is a springboard to success, is a part of my life. And so here I am, 72 years old now. You know, I still remember it like it happened yesterday. But it didn't land me in a situation where I went to drugs or alcohol. I don't drink. I don't use those things. But it's a rare, it's a rare thing, but it happens all too often. Those who were exposed to domestic violence, as I was seeing it, um, I don't turn to it. I have never had that as an issue. Then we talk about, in addition to the biological and the psychological factors that are involved, um, you're going to, and matter of fact, when you do your reading, you're going to find more details about each of these three risk factors for addiction. Environmental factors, finally, whether you have readily access to the substance abuse or experience, you might even get it out of the medicine cabinet or someone else in your family. Um, Abusive or neglectful home environment, um, peer norms, your peers put pressure on you, membership in an alienated, oppressed, or marginalized group, where you get into these gangs or get caught in these conspiracy theory groups like QAnon or one of those type of groups. Life events, as I was talking about, including chronic or acute stressors, things that trigger um, violence in a person, those kinds of things. As we discover, there is a tremendous number of young people who are being addicted at an early age. Let me say this, even as low as elementary school. And the risk factors uh, can really affect your early drug use and is a risk for mental illnesses that will come about later in your life. So let's talk about some of the risk factors. On the left side of this little chart here, you see some of the things that we that take place. You have a chaotic home environment, ineffective parenting, little mutual attachment and nurturing. You feel like you're just all out there by yourself. Inappropriate, shy, or aggressive classroom behavior. We've had those with people in school. Low academics, low academic aspirations, poor social coping skills, not able to cope with people or spend time with people, low social skills, affiliation with deviant peers, perceive external approval, such as the family and the community you live in. There's a high amount of drug traffic, and then substance abuse with your parents or mental illness as well. These are risk factors that juveniles are exposed to. The things that counteract that are on the right side, or the protective factors that are listed here, and there are 6 of those. Strong family bonds. I can't state how important that is. Parental engagement in that child's life. There are many people now who are raised without their parents, as I was, though I had an adopted mother, but it still was a difficult thing. No dad ever in my life from 7 years old. Clear parental expectations and consequences, academic success, which is what I achieved, strong bonds with institutions such as the school. I was involved in activities at the school. I was involved in community activities. And then, of course, I was definitely involved in the church, as I am now as a pastor. One of my first jobs was a youth pastor and worked my way up to working in men's ministry and now senior pastor. Conventional norms about drugs and alcohol, recognizing the effects that drugs and alcohol have on people and seeing them in my life, having lost a sister who overdosed on cocaine and one other sister who disappeared because she went from crack house to crack house and we never heard from her after 94. And then having a situation where alcohol was present in the house when my dad was killed, never forgetting the smell of that from that as a kid. Okay. So all of these are factors that contribute to individuals become juvenile drug users. And so finally, we come to what we do in our system. So in our juvenile justice system, as you should be aware, we work more towards rehabilitation. We've been working toward that for years. We work to try to intervene in the life of that individual, divert them away from the life that led them to become a juvenile delinquent, and then we provide the treatment that's necessary and get them in terms of redirecting them. Remember the same thing I talked about, getting individuals from 12 o'clock where you committed the offense, going clockwise to 3, which is the halfway point. You can see where you came from, you see where you're going, and then you get down to 6 o'clock at the bottom of the clock where you are at the point where you can not see where you came from, but you have a new direction in life and grow in that direction. And then if you begin to grow on that, and as we say, move further on that, not up the clock, but stay there, but like in a rear view mirror, if you drive away from a situation, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. It may still be there, but you at least become oblivious to it. But if you go back or you go around the clock, head back up to 12, it's going to be worse. So then we have issues that we have to deal with individuals, and I taught special ed for a number of years, so I know all about this. You deal with substance abuse disorder because of ADHD, attention deficit health disorder, and those individuals are very difficult in terms of helping them. A lot of times drugs are used, Ritalin and other drugs are prescribed to keep those individuals in line so that they can move and progress forward. Says though it is clear that ADHD medications they don't increase the risk of substance use disorders, but they instead suppress the desire and begin to help those individuals. Not all, but most. So as we conclude in this section here, it's research on the connection between substance use disorder and severe mental health disorders in youth is minimal. However, research indicates that adolescents with substance use disorders also have a high rate of co-occurring mental health issues. So the older they become, and over 60% of adolescents and community-based substance use disorder treatment programs are necessary to help those individuals in their situation. Okay? So you begin to see the relationship. Okay. And this has pretty much been covered. These are the references down here. So you can see that there is a great deal of circumstances that individuals find themselves dealing with substance abuse, addiction, and mental health. But mental health is like I said again, can be a very serious issue there, okay? So let's look at the enforcement policies. Now, as you probably should be aware, punishment is where we started out at. You know, we started out, you know, let's look at the prohibition when you couldn't take a drink, and the 21st Amendment was passed, which allowed legalized alcohol for adults. And so in 1970, 1914, cocaine became illegal. And then this just gives you a timetable. Marijuana in 37, but then later on it went the other way. Now it's back to where it was then. Then they talk about marijuana and cocaine. And you can see where the drugs are become Schedule 1 drugs and so forth. And so then in the 80s began what we call the war on drugs. And what that really simply meant is you began to be um, sentenced to more criminal time, more jail time for crimes dealing with drugs and substance abuse, and then mandatory sentencing. And what that resulted in is, first of all, number one, individuals not being treated, but being locked up and overcrowded in the jails. Because unfortunately, there were two kinds of individuals that were dealing the drugs. There were individuals who were dealing to support their habits, and then there were individuals who were predatory, who were using those people to make money, and they were not users of drugs. In other words, they were the distributors. So remember, the everybody who is caught with drugs is not, quote, a distributor in the eyes the way we see it, because when we, in law enforcement, when I was a police officer and I worked with the drug group, we found ourselves trying to get what we call the big fish, to cut off the suppliers of those drugs. But oftentimes it's the pawns that we end up getting. And unfortunately, these are individuals who find themselves in the category of drug distributors and drug users. So the war on drugs said that if you got caught with a certain amount of drugs, you received a certain sentence. And back in those days, we were talking about crack cocaine coming about. Was cheap enough to get, and you can get you a real cheap high. All right. And so the law enforcement took a zero tolerance towards people in possession of crack cocaine. It led to a whole lot of arrests. And most of them didn't go in for treatment. They were just locked up, and then they were released. Well, mandatory sentencing said that they had to receive a certain period of time. Now, you should be aware that one of the places that individuals learn how to be criminals, and I was discussing this today with one of my colleagues who is a correction specialist, and we came to the agreement that prison is a place where an individual learned to become a criminal, even if they weren't one when they went in, and that they are going to either adapt to the life to survive the time that they're in there, and or they're going to learn techniques that even if they turn out later to be wrongfully convicted and incarcerated, they're going to pick up habits, and when they come out, then they will become criminals. And what sometimes people say, oh yeah, they were criminals all the time. I says, no, they adapted to the place where they, excuse me, were incarcerated and picked up those habits and changed their way of life. And so individuals with small amounts of marijuana, and when you got convicted with those things, um, it destroyed your opportunity to get student loans, and it resulted in increasing the amount of money we spent for incarceration. As I've said it before, and I'll say it again, it is cheaper to educate than to incarcerate, and it is also cheaper to treat than to continue reincarceration or dealing with individuals who are recidivists, who constantly find themselves getting out, going back in, getting caught again, getting out. Then it's a mad circle until they hurt somebody and or they are killed themselves. Okay, so the getting tough on crime, war on drugs didn't really change things. It says up to the beginning of the 21st century, the criminal justice system limited most of its consideration of mental health to competency to stand trial. So it wasn't looked at as that's part of the reason why you would turn into drugs. But it was looked at when you had legally been declared insane or competent to stand trial. So it wasn't considered as a serious offense. There was little consideration for mental illness, even as a mitigating factor for conviction, and treatment was almost non-existent. So we had these people who were not really being treated for their mental illness, resulting in using drugs, and they were being incarcerated and over, and they were it was doing a disservice to them. It was making a bad situation worse for these individuals. Okay, so prisons became overcrowded. All right, and so then in the late 90s and 2000s, it became clear that we had to do something different because war on drugs approach was not working. And so what happened is that the lawmakers and people who were being taught to be criminal justice professionals and the mental health professionals began to say, hey, wait a minute. We need to help these people because this is an illness that these people have that is creating this problem, and we need to treat this. A person who is in the hospital for a disease, you don't lock them up, you treat them to try to cure them of the problem. And so they were locked up and then given treatment. If they didn't get adequate treatment, then they became a recidivist. And so we began to move towards a more humane approach to dealing with crime, dealing with treatment and rehabilitation, and using evidence-based practices such as providing mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, and or even alcohol treatment. And those individuals were to be treated for dealing with those issues as opposed to just locking up and throwing away the key. And so we recognize that it is a real get to the heart of the matter thing. And so now we have learned, and we will learn later coming up, that law enforcement deals with things called deflection, where individuals, instead of being locked up for drug possession, were sent to mental health and rather drug help treatment facilities to help them to deal with this issue. And so it was more ethical and economical alternative to incarceration to divert them for treatment, so that the police were not considered as the enemies, but were someone that instead a person who was addicted to drugs, had a mental health problem, could look to for help to get them the proper sources. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that now. Okay, so with the change, we began to recognize that in these policies, the fact that the going back to the war on drugs was not good for certain segments of the population, particularly the African American community because of issues that were taking place where you had one family one family-led home where there's no father, there's only a mother there, and there was a lot of issues with family structure. And so there was a lot of things that happened. And, you know, the husbands and the fathers either had no skills or um, not able to keep employment. And the young people began to get involved in drug activities. I talked about the single parent. So the President of the United States, President Obama, came about and signed what we call the Fair Sentence Act. And it was introduced by our senior senator, Dick Durbin in Illinois, who's still in the Senate now. And to try to seek to get help for individuals. And the bill passed and came into effect. And what happened is that we recognize that that we need to work together with those individuals who are on drugs, and that the injustices of the war on drugs need to be corrected, and that as it gave an example here, under the previous law, that was when we had war on drugs, 5 grams of crack cocaine, which is a small amount, would have a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years, while trafficking approximately 1 pound of powder, the same sentence. So they both had the same, but one was a victim of, and the other one was a profit maker. And so this law sought higher penalties for helping individuals. The previous law had higher penalties for crack, which was disproportionately affecting the African American community. And so the act, the Fair Sentencing Act, was introduced, and then there came about elimination of disparity treatment for crack and powder cocaine. And Durbin negotiated an agreement with the senators to achieve a unanimous committee vote. Well, the compromise passed both the House and the Senate, and an increase for drug traffickers, and mandated that the Sentencing Commission increase for aggravating factors, individuals making it for profit and were not just victims. And so the key thing is that the legislation was designed to eliminate mandatory minimum sentence for simple possession of crack cocaine, which, as I earlier said, was a problem. And so it began to bring some parity. So we continue to move forward in that direction to try to help individuals to stay out of jail, keep out of jail, by providing programs for mental health, alcohol treatment, and other community-based programs. Okay. So the idea is to cut down on recidivists and to redirect people in a new life. As I said earlier, from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. So this movement here is something that would take place at 6 o'clock to help individuals never to find themselves back in that situation. So we begin to move toward rehabilitation. That's the key right there for you to remember. Okay, we're just about out of time. So we deal with rehabilitation versus punishment. We've already kind of talked about the war on drugs. And then we came up with drug courts that started in the late 80s. And moving forward, the idea, and if you click on each of these, you can see um, from, let's see, that makes it bigger. Let's reduce that down. So the timeline is down here from 89 when the crack epidemic, and if you see, you can see we move closer to more drug courts. I represented individuals in drug court, and in drug court, generally you didn't find a person not guilty, but what you did was you took a plea and you got some treatment. And then moving forward, where we finally recognized in 2017 mental health courts to help individuals that we're working on even now. Okay. And that's pretty much it. So we have these courts to move away from punishment to rehabilitation. All right. And then we get down to just the knowledge check. This is for you, but I'm just going to show you. We're a minute over, but I'm getting ready to wrap. So patients with schizophrenia tend to have high rates of sleep disorders, alcohol, caffeine use, weight loss. Okay, so what do you think? Let's try that one. That's it. I already talked about that earlier. And then you go to each one, and it'll be based on what we talked about in the lecture, and then complete the survey. All right. So that's it for today. And I have to give you a phrase. I've talked about it enough, so it's very on point that one of the main topics we talked about today is mental health. That's it. Mental health. That's the key phrase you give me, you get your points. All right, so pay attention to what I said earlier in the lecture, get those assignments in, and continue to do better. When you make a mistake, get up. So I'll see you next week at 7 o'clock p.m. for week number 4. Have a good one. And have a safe Memorial Day weekend as well. Good night.